The night was filled with excitement and luxury as the exclusive gala took place at a grand hotel in the heart of the city. It was a high-profile event, and everyone who was anyone in town was there. The ballroom was packed with rich businessmen, socialites, and influential people, all dressed in their finest clothes. The sparkling chandeliers above the guests cast a soft glow, and the polished marble floors reflected the light beautifully. The atmosphere was electric, buzzing with laughter, chatter, and the sound of glasses clinking together in celebration. The event had been organized to celebrate a new business venture, and the hotel's staff was working tirelessly to ensure that everything went smoothly. Elegant waiters like Ella moved gracefully through the crowd, serving drinks and hors d'oeuvres. Their faces were polite but focused as they navigated between the guests with trays held high. The evening's entertainment was meant to be a sophisticated piano performance. A professional pianist had been hired to provide music throughout the night. His music was soft and gentle, meant to fill the background without stealing too much attention away from the conversations happening around the room. At first, the guests seemed to appreciate the music as they mingled, but as time passed, it became clear that the energy of the room was starting to fade. The pianist, while skilled, lacked the ability to truly captivate the guests. His playing was safe, predictable, and a little too quiet for such a lively crowd. The sound of the piano was now mostly drowned out by the louder conversations and laughter that filled the air. As the night wore on, people began to lose interest. The music was no longer something people listened to, but more of a background noise. The guests, many of whom had come to the gala to network and make deals, were busy talking and exchanging business cards. They hardly seemed to notice the pianist anymore. Some of them were even checking their phones, waiting for something more exciting to happen. Ella, the waitress, had been working in the hotel for a few months now. She had always been quiet, keeping to herself, focused on her job. She never made a fuss, always going unnoticed in the crowd. But there was one thing people didn't know about her. She loved music. She had grown up playing the piano, and it had always been her dream to perform. But life had never given her the chance to pursue it. She had been too busy trying to make ends meet, working multiple jobs to support her family. Ella loved hearing the piano music in the background, even though it wasn't the most exciting performance. She would often stop for a moment, letting the sound wash over her, remembering her own days of playing at home. But as the night went on, she started to feel frustrated. She knew the music could be more than just background noise. It could touch people's hearts if played with passion. Her fingers itched to play again, but she knew it wasn't her place to take over the piano. One moment, as she passed by the piano, she glanced at the player. The pianist seemed tired and distracted, his mind clearly elsewhere. He wasn't playing with the same energy or attention that he had at the beginning of the evening. She noticed a few guests whispering to each other and looking bored. A thought flashed through her mind, and her heart raced a little. What if she played? At that moment, something inside her clicked. She had always dreamed of performing in front of an audience, and even though she was just a waitress, this could be her chance. She knew it was risky, but sometimes opportunities didn't come twice. With a deep breath, she made up her mind. She approached the piano, hesitating for just a second before asking the pianist if she could play for a while. He looked at her, surprised by her request, but after a brief pause, he nodded, clearly not wanting to make a scene. He stood up and walked away, leaving the piano to her. As she sat down at the piano, her heart beat faster. The weight of the crowd's eyes on her made her nervous, but she pushed those feelings aside. This was her moment, and she wasn't going to let fear stop her. Ella's hands hovered over the keys, her fingers trembling slightly. But she focused on the music inside her. The music she had kept hidden for so long. For just a few moments, Ella forgot about everything around her. She wasn't a waitress anymore, serving drinks to a crowd of rich strangers. She was a pianist, about to share her passion with the world. She closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and began to play dot as the first notes of the piano echoed through the room. Something magical happened. The music was unlike anything the guests had heard all evening. It was filled with emotion, precision, and grace. It was clear from the start that Ella was no ordinary waitress, and she was about to show everyone just how much she had been hiding. This was the beginning of a night none of them would ever forget dot as the night continued. Ella couldn't help but notice the growing restlessness among the guests. The excitement from earlier in the evening seemed to have faded, replaced by the soft murmur of bored conversations and the faint clink of glasses being set down. The pianist, who had started off the night with skillful yet predictable melodies, was losing the crowd's attention. His music had become little more than background noise, distant and fading, almost like the hum of a distant engine. Ella, who had been working tirelessly throughout the event, couldn't shake the feeling that something needed to change. She walked around the room, gracefully balancing trays of champagne flutes and appetizers. Her movements were swift and practiced, but her mind was somewhere else. She was listening. She could hear the piano notes, but they seemed so distant, so empty. The guests barely acknowledged the music anymore, too caught up in their own conversations. She could almost feel the tension in the air. They were waiting for something to stir them, something more engaging than the soft, predictable background music. It wasn't that the pianist wasn't talented, he was, but there was something missing. The music lacked heart, a certain spark. It felt mechanical, like the notes were being played by memory rather than passion. Ella, however, couldn't help but feel that this moment could still be salvaged. It was as if the room was begging for something different, something unexpected. She had spent countless hours at the piano growing up, teaching herself to play, feeling every note in her soul. Music had always been an escape for her, a place where she could truly express herself. But that was a long time ago. In the whirlwind of life, she had pushed her dreams aside. Tonight, though, something inside her stirred a deep, almost primal urge to take the chance and share her music. She glanced over at the piano, and her heart skipped a beat. The pianist was distracted now, his eyes on his phone as he tried to check his messages, no longer paying full attention to the crowd or his music. The sound of his playing had become even more lackluster, as if he too had given up. Ella's gaze lingered on the piano keys, almost hypnotic in their simplicity. For just a brief moment, she imagined herself sitting there, playing. But then, reality hit her. She wasn't supposed to be the one playing. She was just the waitress, a part of the background. She had no right to step into the spotlight, no matter how much she longed for it. Her fingers twitched at the thought of touching the keys again, but she quickly pushed the idea out of her mind. Who would want to listen to a waitress play the piano? No one would take her seriously. Yet the longer she stood there, the more her frustration grew. The music was dying, and the crowd was fading into indifference. It was like an opportunity was slipping away, a moment of magic waiting to happen. Ella's heart raced as she looked back at the pianist. He seemed completely detached, almost as if he had given up on the night himself. There was no more passion in his playing, no more connection to the crowd. At that moment, something clicked inside her. It was as if a voice inside her head said, "Why not? Why shouldn't I be the one to play?" The thought startled her. Was she really considering this? Was she willing to risk everything, her job, her reputation, her comfort zone, all for a moment that might not even go as she imagined? But Ella had always been the type to do what others didn't expect. She had spent her entire life hidden behind a mask of quiet humility, never showing the world what she was truly capable of. Tonight, though, she could feel that hidden talent bubbling up, begging to be set free. Without thinking too much about it, Ella walked over to the piano. Her shoes clicked on the marble floor as she moved confidently toward the pianist, who looked up in surprise as she approached. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts racing through her mind. Would it be all right if I played for a bit? The pianist blinked, clearly taken off guard by her request. He seemed about to refuse, but then, after a long pause, he shrugged. Sure, he said with a half-hearted smile. I could use a break anyway. He stood up and stepped away from the piano, leaving Ella standing before the keys. The crowd was still distracted, not paying attention to her yet, and she took a moment to breathe. The silence around her was deafening. For a few seconds, it felt like the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Ella sat down on the bench, her fingers hovering over the keys. The piano felt cold under her hands at first, but as she adjusted, she could feel the familiar warmth of the keys. She closed her eyes for a moment and let the noise of the room fade away. All she could hear was the music in her head, the same melody she had played countless times before in the solitude of her apartment. This was her chance, her one shot to show the world who she really was. Her fingers touched the keys gently at first, almost as if testing the waters. Then, with a deep breath, she started to play. The music flowed through her like a river breaking free from a dam. It was fluid, full of emotion, every note carefully chosen. Ella poured her heart into the performance, her body swaying with the rhythm as if the music itself was carrying her. And just like that, the room changed. The guests, who had been chatting and laughing, suddenly grew silent. The faint buzz of conversation died away, replaced by the powerful sound of the piano filling the space. Ella's music didn't just fill the room, it took over, wrapping around the guests like a warm embrace. Her fingers danced across the keys, creating a beautiful melody that was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just background noise anymore, it was a moment of pure, raw emotion. And everyone in the room could feel it. Ella's nerves slowly disappeared as she played, her confidence growing with every passing note. This wasn't just a performance, it was her soul, laid bare for everyone to hear. The crowd, who had been indifferent just moments ago, now sat in stunned silence, captivated by her every move. The music had struck a chord deep within them, and they couldn't look away. For the first time in a long while, Ella wasn't just a waitress serving drinks. She was a pianist, a performer, and the heart of the room. And nothing would ever be the same again, not as the last echo of Ella's piano notes filled the room. The guests sat frozen in awe. The sound of the final chord lingered in the air, leaving a tangible silence that stretched for what felt like an eternity. No one moved, no one spoke. It was as if the world had come to a complete halt. Ella's heart raced in her chest as she sat at the piano, her fingers still hovering over the keys, unsure of what would come next. She hadn't expected the room to go so quiet. She hadn't expected anything to happen at all. But here she was, with everyone's eyes on her. Her music still resonating through the space. Her fingers trembled, and she quickly pulled them away from the piano, placing them in her lap as if she were afraid to touch anything again. She glanced up at the crowd, all of whom were staring at her, their mouths slightly agape. The room seemed to have transformed in an instant from a casual gathering of the city's elite to a room full of people who had just witnessed something extraordinary. Ella's mind was spinning, and the stillness in the air was almost suffocating. Had she really just done that? Had she just played for all of them, in front of all these people? For a brief, terrifying moment, she wondered if the silence meant that she had done something wrong. Maybe they hadn't liked it. Maybe she had ruined the night. But then, just as quickly, the stillness was broken by the soft clapping of hands. A few guests at the back of the room started, their applause gentle at first, unsure if it was appropriate. But soon, it grew louder, more confident, as other guests followed suit, rising to their feet. Ella blinked in disbelief. Her heart was still pounding, and she felt a knot tighten in her stomach, but the applause was undeniable. The guests were clapping for her. She had never expected such a response, never imagined in a million years that this moment, this risky, spontaneous decision, would lead to something so overwhelming. She could feel their admiration, their amazement, and yet, all she could think about was how lucky she was that her fingers hadn't failed her. In that moment, the applause echoed around the room, but Ella wasn't sure what to do next. She could hear the murmurs of guests around her, their excited whispers filling the silence. Some were asking who she was, others were speculating about her background. They were all talking, but Ella felt like she was in a daze, unsure of how to process it. This wasn't how she had imagined her night would go. She had come here as a waitress, someone just trying to make ends meet. She never thought she would be at the center of such attention. As the applause died down, a man from the front of the room stepped forward, his eyes bright with excitement. He was dressed in a sleek black suit, his dark hair neatly combed back. Ella recognized him immediately as one of the wealthiest guests at the gala. He was a well-known music producer, someone whose name had been whispered with reverence in the music world. She had seen him speak at events before, and though she had never dared to approach him, she had always admired his work from afar. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice filled with curiosity and admiration. "I've never heard anyone play like that before." "You're extraordinary." Ella felt her breath catch in her throat. She had to remind herself to stay calm, to not let her nerves get the best of her. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, let alone being praised by someone as influential as him. "I'm just a waitress," she stammered, unsure of how to respond. I don't perform for people. I just play sometimes at home." The producer smiled, clearly not convinced by her modesty. "Well, you shouldn't hide this talent of yours," he said with a confident nod. "That was incredible. I think you have something special here. Something that could really move people." Ella felt a blush creep up her neck as the producer's words sank in. Her hands were still shaking from the performance, and she had no idea how to process what was happening. As if on cue, another guest, a well-known concert pianist, approached. He, too, was clearly impressed by what he had just witnessed. "You have the potential to go far," he said, his voice filled with respect. "Have you ever considered performing professionally?" Ella shook her head, her eyes wide. "I've never thought about it. I've just always played for myself." The pianist's eyes softened. "You could do so much more than just play for yourself. This is a gift, a rare one. Don't let it go to waste." Ella looked around the room, her mind racing. Everyone was still watching her, waiting for her next move. The music producer was still standing near her, offering his card, while others looked on with interest. For a moment, Ella felt like a deer caught in headlights, not knowing how to respond to these sudden offers and attention. She had always kept her dreams to herself, buried deep inside. She had learned to silence that part of her that wanted to perform, that wanted to share her music with the world. Life had always been too demanding, too focused on survival. Music had been nothing more than a distant memory. But now here she was, being asked if she would consider a future she had never allowed herself to dream of. Her mind swirled with conflicting emotions. She was overwhelmed by the support, yet terrified of the unknown. Was this really happening? Was this the moment that could change everything? "You should perform again," the producer said, breaking into her thoughts. "Come to my studio. Let's see what we can do together." Ella looked at the card in his hand, the weight of the moment sinking in. A part of her wanted to run away, to leave the night behind and return to her quiet life. But another part of her, the part that had been buried for so long, was starting to wake up. This could be the opportunity she had been waiting for, even if she hadn't realized it until now. With a deep breath, Ella finally nodded. This wasn't just about playing the piano anymore. This was about embracing the unknown, taking a leap of faith into a world she had always dreamed of, but never had the courage to pursue. It was her time to rise. Ella's fingers still tingled from the piano keys, the echo of the final note still vibrating in her mind. As the applause settled, the music producer, the renowned pianist, and a handful of other influential guests hovered around her, their faces glowing with admiration. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her, but it wasn't uncomfortable, it was exhilarating. A strange warmth spread through her chest, almost like she had just stepped into a spotlight she never thought she would stand under. Yet, even as she absorbed the praise, Ella's mind was racing. Could this really be happening? She asked herself, could this be the break I've dreamed of but buried for so long? But amid all the admiration, there was one question Ella hadn't yet answered. What was she going to do with all of this? For most of her life, music had been a quiet, private passion, something she kept to herself as a way to escape the chaos of her day-to-day. As a young girl, she had always dreamed of performing in front of a grand audience, of playing with the kind of passion that would make her name known in concert halls. But reality had a way of squashing dreams, and the life of a waitress had taken over her existence. She had let her musical ambitions slip away, her piano gathering dust at home, her talent slowly fading into the background, and yet, now, standing at the center of the room. With everyone watching her, something had shifted inside her. The applause had stopped, but the excitement still hung in the air, like a charged atmosphere, humming with possibility. She could feel the eyes of the guests, no longer just curious onlookers, but people who had just witnessed something extraordinary. She had given them a gift, a moment they wouldn't forget, and they were eager for more. The music producer stepped forward again, this time with more determination in his voice. "Ella," he said, his eyes locking with hers, "I know this might all be a lot to process right now, but you've got something special. What you just played, it's rare. You've got the kind of talent that can touch hearts and change lives. I can help you take that to the next level." Ella's heart skipped a beat. Help me. The idea sounded almost too good to be true. The producer was known for working with some of the top names in music, and the thought of being even a small part of that world seemed beyond her reach. But his words rang in her ears, echoing in the silence that followed. "I don't know," Ella replied quietly, still trying to gather her thoughts. "I've never thought of myself as someone who could perform professionally. I mean, I'm just a waitress. I'm not part of that world." The producer smiled, as if he had expected this response. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, holding it out to her. "That's exactly why you need to be part of it. You're not just a waitress, Ella. You're an artist. And sometimes, the world doesn't recognize talent until it's right in front of them. You've already shown us what you're capable of. Don't let that go to waste. Come to my studio, and let's see where this goes." Ella hesitated, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her apron. She had always been the kind of person who kept her dreams locked away, afraid to open the door to something bigger. Music was personal, a quiet escape from her busy life. But now, she was standing on the edge of something unfamiliar, something that could either change everything or crash down on her in an instant. As if reading her mind, the pianist who had been watching from the sidelines stepped forward, offering her a supportive smile. "You have a gift, Ella," he said, his voice warm and encouraging. "It's rare to see someone with such raw talent. I've been performing for years, and I can tell you right now, you've got what it takes to make it. You don't have to stay behind the scenes. If you want this, you can have it." The words, simple yet powerful, hit Ella like a wave. She had spent so much of her life doubting herself, questioning whether her dreams were even worth chasing. But now, with the support of these strangers, who had seen something in her she hadn't even known was there, she began to wonder if maybe she was meant for something more than just serving drinks and taking orders. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine it. What if? What if she said yes? What if she walked through the door the producer was holding open for her? What if this was her moment? She glanced around the room, taking in the faces of the guests who had witnessed her performance. Their eyes weren't filled with pity or condescension. as she had expected. Instead, there was genuine respect, awe even. Ella had shared a part of herself with them, and it had touched them in a way she hadn't anticipated. She had done something she'd always been too afraid to do. She had let her passion shine through. And it had been enough to captivate an entire room. "Okay," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves swirling inside her. "I'll give it a try. I'll come to the studio. But I'm not promising anything. I'm not sure if I'm ready for this kind of life." The producer's face lit up with a smile. "That's all I'm asking. Just take the first step. We'll take it one day at a time." Ella nodded, feeling a sense of calm settle over her. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but for the first time in years, she felt a spark of excitement. It was like a door had opened, and beyond it lay a world she had only dreamed of, a world where her music wasn't just a quiet hobby, but something that could change her life. As the evening wore on, and the guests continued to mingle, Ella found herself still sitting by the piano, her thoughts racing. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was an artist, someone who had shared a piece of her soul with a room full of strangers, and in return, had been offered a chance to make her dreams come true. And for the first time in a long time, she was ready to take that chance. The days after the gala were a blur of excitement and nervous anticipation for Ella. She could barely remember the quiet, ordinary life she had once known. Each morning, she woke with the weight of the music producer's card in her pocket, feeling its presence like a small promise of a future she had never dared to imagine. Yet, the closer she came to the day she had agreed to meet him, the more she questioned herself. Was this really something she wanted? Could she truly step into a world of music, performance, and expectations? The thought of leaving behind the only life she knew, her steady job as a waitress, the familiar routine, felt both liberating and terrifying. Ella wasn't sure what was scarier, the idea of failing in a world that wasn't hers, or the possibility of succeeding and having to live up to everyone's expectations. Music had always been her escape, her personal solace, and the thought of exposing it to others in such a public way made her uneasy. But the more she thought about the looks of admiration and awe she'd received that night at the gala, the more her self-doubt began to soften. The guests had seen something in her, something she hadn't fully seen in herself. The producers' words echoed in her mind. "You're an artist, not just a waitress." Finally, the day arrived. Ella stood in front of the music producer's studio, her heart racing. She took a deep breath before pushing the door open. Inside, the studio was far more intimidating than she had expected. The walls were lined with soundproof panels, and the room had an almost magical aura, filled with the hum of unplayed instruments and the subtle echo of creative energy. She wasn't sure what she had imagined, but it certainly wasn't this. There were no grand chandeliers or glamorous settings. This was a working space, a place where people came to create, to risk, and to fail. And yet, it felt alive in a way that nothing else in her world had. The producer greeted her with a warm smile and a handshake. "Ella, I'm so glad you could make it," he said, his voice genuine. "I'm excited to see what we can do together." Her stomach fluttered. She wasn't sure what to say. Do I even belong here? She wondered. "Thank you for inviting me," she managed to reply, her voice surprisingly steady. The producer led her to the center of the room, where a grand piano sat beneath a soft spotlight. It wasn't like the elegant, polished pianos she'd seen in concert halls, but rather a humble, slightly worn instrument that seemed to call out to her. "I thought you might feel more comfortable here," the producer said, as though reading her mind. "This isn't about perfection. It's about creating something real. It's about letting your emotions come through." Ella's fingers brushed over the keys, and for a moment, she could almost hear the music swirling inside her. She closed her eyes, trying to push aside the rush of nerves. She had always played for herself, but now, she was playing for someone else, for people who would listen, who would judge her, who would either see the truth in her music or dismiss it entirely. But as her fingers hovered over the keys, the familiar warmth spread through her hands, and she began to play. She started slowly, unsure of where she was going, but as the music took shape, so did her confidence. She let go of her fear, letting the sound envelop her. The melodies that had once been a secret between her and the piano were now a story unfolding for the producer to hear. The producer stood silently at the side, listening intently, his expression unreadable. Ella's heart raced as she played. But something inside her shifted, her nerves began to dissolve, replaced by the energy of the music. She could hear every note as it left her fingers, every pause, every shift in tempo. It was more than just playing. It was communicating, speaking through the keys in a way words could never express. The minutes felt like hours as she played. But when she finally lifted her hands from the piano, the room fell into silence. She dared not look at the producer, her chest heaving with the intensity of the moment. Her palms were sweaty, and she could feel her breath coming in short gasps. What had he thought? Finally, the producer stepped forward, his face lit with admiration. "Ella," he said quietly, his voice almost reverent, "that was breathtaking." Ella blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "You really think so?" He nodded, his eyes locking with hers. "You're not just a waitress. You're a musician, and you've got something truly special." That was incredible. I could feel the passion in every note. "You've got the potential to go places, Ella. Don't let anything stop you." Her heart soared, but at the same time, a knot twisted in her stomach. But what about the fear? What about the doubt? Her mind raced, wondering if she could truly handle a life where her music wasn't just for herself anymore. "I don't know," she said, her voice shaky. "I've never done anything like this before. What if I fail?" The producer smiled, a reassuring warmth in his eyes. "Failure is part of the journey. Everyone who's ever made it has failed at some point. The only difference between them and the ones who never made it is that they didn't give up. You've got the talent. You've got the heart. What's left is to trust yourself and take the next step." Ella looked at the piano again, her fingers still tingling from the last few moments. She wasn't sure what would happen next, whether she was truly ready for the spotlight, or if she could handle the weight of the dreams she had buried for so long. But for the first time, she didn't feel completely afraid. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something bigger than she had ever imagined. She took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay, I'm ready." And in that moment, Ella knew her life had changed forever. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a pianist and artist on the cusp of a journey that would push her to places she had never dared to go. And as she walked out of the studio that day, something deep inside her whispered, "This is only the beginning." The following days felt like a whirlwind to Ella. The studio sessions were intense, and each moment seemed to challenge her in ways she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about playing the piano anymore. It was about transforming the music inside her into something more, something real, something that could be shared with the world. She hadn't expected it to be so hard. The producer, whose name was David, was nothing like the cool, distant figure she had imagined. He was patient, yet persistent, and his belief in her was almost overwhelming. He pushed her harder than she'd ever been pushed before. Ella had always played in private, behind closed doors, where mistakes were easily hidden. But here, every mistake was magnified, every imperfection highlighted. It felt like she was stripping herself bare, exposing everything she had kept hidden. Each day she arrived at the studio, she was met with the sounds of instruments being tuned, voices discussing arrangements, and the soft hum of creativity in the air. She felt out of place at first, like an outsider who had stumbled into a world she didn't belong to. The other musicians, many of whom were experienced professionals, barely gave her a second glance. Ella was just the new girl, the one who had shown up out of nowhere with no track record, no reputation. The thought gnawed at her, what if they don't think I belong here? But David's faith in her kept her going. One day, as she sat at the piano, her fingers lightly pressing down on the keys, David walked into the room with a new idea. He had a glint in his eye, as though he had been waiting for the perfect moment to bring it up. "I think it's time," he said, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "We're ready to record. Not just another practice session. I want to capture your sound, your voice, not just the music." Ella's heart skipped. Record? The word felt so foreign. She wasn't ready for that. Not yet. She was still trying to figure out what her music even was, still stumbling through the technical aspects of playing. But she could see the excitement in David's eyes. He wasn't asking her to perform on some grand stage yet. This was a more intimate kind of recording, just the two of them in the studio. Still, the idea made her feel exposed. "I'm not sure," she said hesitantly. "What if it's not good enough? What if it's too raw?" David leaned against the doorframe, watching her with the same patient intensity that had become his trademark. "That's the point, Ella. We're not looking for perfection. We're looking for truth. Your truth. And that's what the world needs to hear. You might be nervous, but trust me, what you've got is something special. People don't connect with perfection. They connect with authenticity." Ella chewed on his words as she sat back, her fingers resting on the piano. Authenticity, she thought. It sounded so simple, yet so difficult. She had always tried to play it safe, to perfect everything she did, to hide the parts of herself that she thought were too messy or too raw. But now David was asking her to embrace those very things. She wasn't sure she was ready, but deep down, she knew he was right. With a deep breath, she nodded. "Okay, let's do it." The recording process began the next day. David was by her side the entire time, coaching her through each note, each phrase. He would stop her occasionally, asking her to dig deeper, to bring more emotion into the music. "It's not just about playing the notes," he would say. "It's about telling a story, making people feel something. Let them hear your heart." At first, Ella struggled. She had always played piano as a technical skill, focusing on hitting the right notes, staying in time. But this was different. This was about pouring herself into the music. She found herself hesitating, unsure how to channel her emotions into something so tangible, something that could be recorded and played back for others to hear. But with each take, something inside her started to shift. The melodies began to take on new meaning, and the notes she played felt like they had purpose, like they were carrying a message from her soul. It wasn't about perfection anymore, it was about the energy, the vulnerability, the honesty in her performance that after hours of recording. David sat back, listening to the playback with a thoughtful expression. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the speakers. Ella waited anxiously for his verdict, unsure if she had done enough. Finally, David turned to her with a smile. "That was it," he said. "That's what we needed. The raw emotion, the connection. It's real. It's you. People are going to connect with this. You're ready." Ella's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. It felt surreal. After all the self-doubt, after all the uncertainty, she had done it. She had finally created something that felt like her, something that was pure and true. David clapped her on the shoulder. "Now we start putting this out there. We'll take this step by step, but I have no doubt you're ready to share your music with the world." Ella felt a rush of emotions flood through her: excitement, fear, disbelief. She had come so far in such a short time. From the quiet waitress in the corner of that gala to this moment, where she was standing on the edge of a new life, a life that could be defined by music. She walked out of the studio that day, feeling like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She wasn't just playing piano anymore, she was sharing her story. And as she stepped into the unknown, she knew there was no going back. This was her moment. This was her music. And it was time for the world to hear it. The weeks that followed Ella's first recording session, were a blur of sleepless nights and endless decisions. The world she had stepped into, one that had once seemed so distant, almost unreachable, was now her reality. As the days passed, Ella found herself torn between the excitement of this new life and the anxiety of being thrust into a world where expectations were high and every note played was scrutinized. David had set her up with a team of marketing professionals, social media strategists, and even a photographer who would help create an image for her. Suddenly, Ella was no longer just a pianist. She was an artist, and the word felt both exhilarating and terrifying. The pressure to present herself as something more than just a girl from the hotel, something polished and ready for the spotlight, was overwhelming. But David kept assuring her that authenticity was still the key. "Don't lose yourself in the process," he often said. "You're here because of you, because of the music inside you, the truth you bring to the table." Despite his reassuring words, Ella couldn't help but feel like an imposter at times. There she was, sitting in front of a camera, being asked to pose like she was someone who had been in the industry for years, when just a few weeks ago, she had been nervously stepping into a recording studio, unsure if she could even play her heart out. She remembered the gala, how she'd walked into that room feeling small, like just another face in the crowd, and yet somehow had come out of it with an opportunity that changed her life. One afternoon, as Ella sat in a quiet corner of the studio, scrolling through her phone, she was struck by the reality of her new world. The social media posts had begun. Pictures of her at the piano, close-ups of her hands gracefully moving over the keys, and even candid shots of her smiling and laughing during sessions, every image carefully curated to show the artist she was becoming. Each post was met with an outpouring of support from followers, most of whom had no idea who she was beyond her music. There were even comments from music lovers, praising her raw emotion, the honesty in her playing. It was all so overwhelming. Every time she posted something new, her notifications flooded with messages, each one a reminder that she was no longer invisible. The real challenge, she realized, wasn't just creating music, it was navigating this new identity she had to build for herself. One night, as she sat in her small apartment, the quiet hum of the city outside her window felt like a stark contrast to the chaos of her new life. She had always been content with her simple routine, playing piano for herself when no one was watching, just letting her emotions pour out through the keys. But now, the expectations weighed on her. She had a growing following. People were waiting for her next post, her next song. But who was she really, beyond the polished version of herself that she was now presenting to the world? Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a text from David, and the message made her heart skip a beat. "I think it's time to perform. Let's set up your first public show." Ella's stomach dropped. A performance? The thought of standing in front of a crowd, playing music for more than just the studio team or a handful of familiar faces, filled her with a mixture of dread and excitement. She had played countless times before, but it had always been in the privacy of her home, where mistakes didn't feel so monumental. But now, the thought of being judged, being watched, felt suffocating. Could she really do this? She spent the next few days battling her nerves, grappling with the pressure she felt to prove herself. David reassured her every step of the way, reminding her that this was her moment, not to impress others, but to simply be herself. "The music speaks for itself," he told her. "Don't worry about being perfect. Just play from your heart, and the audience will feel that." Ella wanted to believe him. But every time she thought about the performance, a cold knot formed in her stomach. The idea of walking onto a stage and performing live was a far cry from the quiet practice sessions at the studio. What if she made a mistake? What if she couldn't live up to the hype? The day of the performance arrived faster than she anticipated. David had arranged for her debut concert to be held in an intimate venue, a small trendy cafe known for hosting live music. where the atmosphere was laid back, but still intimate enough for a first performance. The venue was packed with eager listeners, some of whom had followed her journey online. Ella could feel the energy in the room as soon as she stepped inside. The lights were dimmed, and the stage was set. Her heart was in her throat, the sound of murmurs from the crowd mixed with the quiet clink of coffee cups and plates. She could see people scanning the small stage, wondering who this young woman was who was about to play in front of them. Some knew her music from social media, while others had come simply because they were curious about the new performer everyone was talking about. But none of them knew her, not the girl behind the social media posts or the polished photos. They had only seen the version of her she allowed the world to see. Backstage, David offered his usual words of encouragement. "Just let the music take over, Ella. You've got this." And for the first time, Ella wasn't sure if she was ready or not. But she was there, and she had no choice but to face the crowd. She walked onto the stage with trembling legs, her fingers tingling in anticipation. The moment she sat at the piano and her fingers touched the keys, the room quieted. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and began to play as the first notes of her song filled the space. A calmness washed over her. She didn't think about the audience anymore. She didn't think about perfection. She only thought about the music. And just like that, Ella was lost in the melody, the same melody that had once been only hers to hear, now shared with a room full of people. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. When the final note faded and the last chord reverberated through the room, the audience was still. Then, slowly, the applause began, gentle at first, then building in intensity. Ella opened her eyes, stunned by the response. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected to feel this alive, to feel so connected to the people in the room. The next few hours were a blur of congratulations and warm smiles. People came up to her after the performance, telling her how much they had enjoyed her music, how they could feel the raw emotion in every note. But it wasn't the praise that stuck with her, it was the realization that she had done it. She had stepped into the unknown and had come out the other side stronger, more confident. She was no longer just the girl who played piano in private. She was Ella the artist, and her music was meant to be shared. And that, Ella realized, was only the beginning. Months passed since that unforgettable night at the small cafe, but Ella could still feel the hum of the crowd's applause reverberating through her. Her life had completely transformed, but not in the way she had expected. The music industry, as glamorous as it seemed from the outside, was filled with unexpected challenges. Yet, the sense of fulfillment she found every time she sat at the piano, every time she played for an audience, made it all worthwhile. After her debut performance, the offers started rolling in. Smaller venues, private events, and even requests for music videos. The team David had assembled around her was doing everything they could to build her brand, designing album covers, curating social media content, and creating buzz for her upcoming projects. But all the while, Ella found herself struggling to find a balance between the artist she was becoming and the person she had always been. She still found herself sneaking moments to sit quietly by her piano at home, playing the songs that had once been just for her. There was a purity to that music, a sense of freedom that she couldn't quite replicate in the spotlight. One afternoon, while reviewing new promotional material at the studio, Ella found herself staring out the window, lost in thought. It was hard to believe that just a few months ago, she had been working as a waitress at a hotel, serving drinks to the city's elite. Now she was an artist with a following and expectations that came with it. People were beginning to recognize her name, and her social media following was growing exponentially with each new release. But as her audience grew, so did the pressure. Everyone had an opinion about what kind of music she should make, what direction she should take. It was easy to get lost in the noise. David had been telling her for weeks that the next step was to create her first full-length album, a collection of songs that would define her as an artist. He pushed her to write new material, to explore different sounds, to challenge herself. It was exciting, but also incredibly daunting. Ella felt the weight of her own potential, the pressure to live up to the excitement surrounding her debut. One day, after a particularly challenging recording session, Ella found herself alone in the studio. The weight of it all finally hit her. She had been chasing something for so long that she hadn't stopped to ask herself if it was still what she truly wanted. Was this what she had dreamed of all those years ago when she first sat at the piano as a child? Or had she become a part of something she didn't fully understand yet? The thought lingered, unsettled, until David walked in, noticing the faraway look in her eyes. "What's on your mind?" he asked gently, sitting down beside her. Ella hesitated for a moment before speaking, unsure of how to put her feelings into words. "I don't know anymore. I thought I wanted all of this, but sometimes it feels like I've lost myself along the way. I feel like I'm being pulled in so many directions, and I'm not sure who I am anymore. The music I used to play for myself, the music I loved, it feels like it's getting lost in all of this noise. The pressure to be something everyone else wants me to be." David listened quietly, nodding in understanding. "I get it," he said. "This industry can be a lot, especially when you're doing it for everyone else. But you have to remember why you started playing in the first place. You have something that no one else has. That's why people connect with your music. It's you. Don't lose that." His words hung in the air, and Ella felt the weight lift slightly from her shoulders. It was a reminder she needed. Amid the pressure, the expectations, and the hustle, her music was hers. She could still create, still express herself without succumbing to the noise. And maybe, just maybe, that was the key to finding peace in this new world she had entered. That night, after leaving the studio, Ella sat down at the piano in her apartment, letting her fingers hover over the keys. She had been too focused on what others wanted her to do. But now, she had to find her voice again. It was time to return to the music she had once played for herself, raw, unfiltered, and true. The first few notes were hesitant, but as her fingers danced across the keys, she felt a sense of calm. She was creating again, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The melodies flowed from her in ways they hadn't before. This was her music, her truth. And it felt right. Over the next few weeks, Ella continued to write new songs. This time without worrying about fitting into a mold or meeting anyone's expectations. The music was coming from a place deep inside her, and it felt more authentic than anything she had done before. She began to share snippets of these new tracks with her fans, each post revealing a little more of the artist she was becoming. The response was overwhelming. Her followers were drawn to the vulnerability in her music, to the raw emotion that came through every note. They could feel the change in her, the shift from someone who was trying to please everyone to someone who was finally being true to herself. When the time came to record her album, Ella approached it differently. She took her time, letting the music come naturally, working with her team to bring her vision to life. She didn't rush it. She let each song breathe and evolve as it needed to. This album wasn't just for the world, it was for her, a way to reclaim her music and her story. The album was released to critical acclaim, but more importantly, it felt like the truest expression of who Ella had become. Her fans embraced it, not just for the music, but for the honesty it represented. And as she stood in front of a sold-out crowd at her album release concert, Ella realized something that had eluded her for so long. This was exactly where she was meant to be. The applause that filled the room that night was not just for her. Music, it was for the journey she had taken, the courage she had found within herself to take a chance and live her truth. Ella wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was an artist with a future she had once only dreamed of, and it was finally hers.